visualization and with the different proposals, very concrete ones. And in the end, we are going to take some questions from the audience as well, so that you can interact with panelists. So welcome to all these panelists. We'll have Aianca from Chile, Guillermo coming from Ecuador, Larissa from Honduras, and Yanderi, who is online from the Dominican Republic. You can hear us very well, right? Well, welcome. So I am co-founder of Youth for Energy. And first of all, I would like to talk between 3 to 5 minutes so that people get to know you a bit better from your own words, what you do, and how you are how are you making a difference from your role as young people in terms of energy. So let's start from the host country. Cata, please, you have your and then we will continue with Larissa, and we will close with Guillermo.
Hola, ¿se escucha
Welcome.
bien?
Can you hear me? Okay,
Bueno,
thank you
buenos
very
días a
much.
todos. Muchas
Well, good
gracias
morning,
por la
everyone. Thank you so
invitación
much for this invitation and this space.
Bienvenidos a los que están llegando.
Welcome to those who are also arriving from
Bueno, yo
different
soy Catalina
countries.
Sandoval.
I'm Catalina Sandoval, 26 years old. I am from
Yo
Chile,
estudié
and
ingeniería
I studied mechanical and industrial engineering. I'm working in engineering electric motors. And this is about electrical purposes. This is the national manufacturer, and these are buses made here, and this is the first company of this type in Chile and Latin America. Something interesting is that the founders were young people, more or less of my age, when they founded between 2016 and 2017. These were young engineers, electrical engineer and a mechanical engineer, who came together with an idea of giving like a second life to the former buses, old buses. This ended up in the manufacturing of 0 kilometers buses. But this was a youth initiative. It was done by the youth. That's how this company started up, and they have now 130 buses, electrical buses. In addition, they have an area of A plus B that is very important. Personally, I was in the project of a hydrogen-based bus, which was the first hydrogen-based bus made in Chile. This project represented different things, really. First of all, we are developing local knowledge that has been driven by and boosted by young people. There's a know-how that is remaining here in Chile and Latin America. This is a knowledge in Spanish, which is extremely important as well, and literature, papers. Most of the research is English. It's very important to create these now in Spanish. Very important for the region. We are also contributing to the transition to greener transportation. This is something that the world is needing currently. Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you, Cata.
Hola, muy buenos días.
Well, good morning.
A cada uno de ustedes que nos acompaña el día de hoy.
Each one of
Mi
you
nombre
is
es
Larissa Sierra. I am from Honduras.
Un poco, pues, mi experiencia profesional. Tengo
This
alrededor de
is
5 años trabajando como consultora para la cooperación
I'm
internacional,
working with the international
pues,
cooperation for through this
al
development.
país en la
I
construcción de
help the country in the
públicas
building
a través
public
de la
policies
cooperación,
through
también
cooperation
en la canalización de financiamiento y la
and
arquitectura
the channeling of
financiera
financing,
para
climate
diferentes
financial architecture for
ONGs
different
del país, al
for
igual que
different
apoyar a
fields
los
of the
gobiernos
country, as well as
municipales
supporting the
esa gestión de
municipalities in
financiamiento
the
que muchas
finance
veces
management
tienen
that
esa
many
capacidad
times they
técnica
don't have that
de
technical
poder canalizar un
capacity to be
financiamiento
able to
climático
channel climate
desde su
financing
institución,
from
ya sea
their
por
own institutions,
la
whether
falta de
because of
capacidad
lack
técnica,
of a technical
la
capacity
poca
or
gestión social que muchas veces se hace desde las
little social
municipalidades.
management from the
He
municipalities
apoyado
themselves. I
bastantes
have
municipios
supported a couple
de
of
Honduras en esa
municipalities in
gestión
Honduras
de
in that
financiamiento
regard
y
and
un
in
poco
terms of
pues
financing. and a little bit generally as a consultant of the program of the United Nations. They were supporting Honduras in terms of the strategy of decarbonization in the long term. And this actually tells us the guideline on how Honduras has to accomplish decarbonization by 2050 to the prioritized sectors, which are the IPCC sectors that create the largest emissions. And from the convention that they are recognized as net zero on the residues and industrial processes. In fact, when we participate in all these projections in the long term, we identify all those measures. I believe that most people, the director of OLADE, the Minister of Energy, they talk a lot about how to accomplish that decarbonization. The countries are very idealistic sometimes, and as we say, well, the paper it holds anything, holds anything, but the reality is quite different when we have to face as a country. From my role as a consultant and as part and representative of the youth in this process, well, I try for all these instruments to have a technical criteria and very consistent to the reality of the country. And this is actually the hardest part of the process. Currently, I am updating the NDC 3.0, which are the determining national contributions or the NDCs with a technical team. That's another instrument that has its own complexity. And little by little, we are going to be discussing in the panel. But I think that all the countries are running so that we can submit the NDC in the term that we need the Chile's. I think it's about to submit them. Also, several countries who are in this updating process of the NDC. This is a very complex instrument, an instrument that basically tells us how to channel the financing through it, and it is very complex at the end of the document, how to accomplish so that the idea does not remain only a problem, but just to take this to reality. Thank you so much.
Claro que sí, ¿me escuchan?
Ahí te escuchamos bien, amigo.
Yes, so
Adelante.
we're listening. Yes. Well, tell us a little bit.
¿Y qué estás haciendo?
Bueno, sí, mi nombre es Jeffrey Núñez, soy de...
Well, my name is Jeffrey Núñez. I am from Dominican Republic. I am an entrepreneur, young entrepreneur with several knowledge, international and national knowledge. This year, I was recognized as one of the 1 billion PAT, which is a prize, an award that was endorsed by Beijing and 14 Peace Prize Nobel Prize. Also, in terms of AI to reduce the corruption in the public institutions in Paraguay, Dominican Republic. This is also a video game, a virtual video game that helps the youth to raise awareness in regard to the climate change crisis. This video game was also awarded by the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, among the best 20 video games and startups of 2024 as a change maker. These were the actors of sustainable development, and currently we're working on it. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Jeffrey is online from Dominican Republic, right? Well, thank you so much for your kind participation. And let's continue with you. Yes, so Guillermo Largo, they're from Ecuador. I have a master and an international level. One was done in Spain and then Italy. I am specialized in fossil fuels, such as I was in my practice. I am within Ecuador. I came back to Ecuador 2 years ago. We have this large business that we have been able to bring from Europe, that is natural gas, as a support to diversification of the energy matrix. Unfortunately, in my country, we have developed 90% of electricity is done through hydropower. This is an issue, a huge issue in Ecuador right now. 6 months ago, we had some blackouts, some outages because of climate change. This is something that we cannot predict. Human beings cannot know 100% what's going on with climate change. So now I am doing some consulting services with offshore grids. We have the Pacific Ocean, so we have some reserves of natural gas, and we cannot send this to bleeding because of the geopolitical concerns that we are going through right now. Geopolitically speaking, our country is quite unsteady. We cannot have a foreign investment because is within the political, and no country wants to invest in that. So that's why I'm trying to work on natural gas innovation to let the world know that Ecuador has proven reserves. I've always given the example of Qatar. Qatar, until 2015, they are part of the Arab League, and the World Cup was actually took place in World Cup occurred took place in Qatar, and we have to raise awareness to the citizens about the impact of discovering these resources. If there is no corruption and everything is well managed within the production of hydrocarbons, the country can have a very high development that we can actually become power. I mean, talking within South America, of course. That's why I am within these spaces with OLADE trying to let them know what natural gas is about and what could drive into our country. If all the countries can come together and bring together all these ideas about energy efficiency. Basically, in all the presentations that I have delivered, I don't like the word or the term transition. It would be like something that we can do within energy because the population keeps growing and demand is much, much higher. So human beings demand more energy, and what we need to find is more solutions to be friendlier with the environment and to have more energy support, but without damaging or harming the ecosystem that has already been harmed. And within the hydrocarbon sector, we're stigmatized because of the emission of the CO2 emissions. But likewise, we're providing the solutions such as the CO2 storage in Saudi Arabia. I was able to present about one solution. We can have solutions where the entire carbon dioxide through the combustion of fossil fuels can be sequestrated, can be stored in reservoirs that are depleted or in aquifer reservoirs. So we are doing that innovation. We should do just an innovation that would be responsible with the environment. Thank you so much, Guillermo. Well, as you can see, people who are joining us, they come from different areas, from public policy, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the different ways in we can support the energy sector. That's what makes so rich this specific panel. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I think that is important for everyone to listen a little bit about your background and who you are. Well, now starting a little bit to the subject matter and to deepen into what you work on. We've been talking before what would be these questions. And we're going to get started, Guillermo. I don't know if we can start with you. Basically, Guillermo and I have been talking, and we come to the agreement of this question. Guillermo, how do you think that the strategic integration of natural gas in the energy matrix of Ecuador and its leverage as a resource of export that can diversify the economy and contribute to the energy sustainability in the context of these economic and energy crisis that your country is going through? Well, in regard to the question, as I mentioned, diversification is really good because we need to pull off urgent solutions to what is happening to climate change crisis. It is indispensable. We cannot predict what is happening. Climate change is quite evident now. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, in Ecuador, we have developed an energy matrix of 90% of hydropower. We had droughts, there was outages because we didn't diversify within the energy matrix. But now we're proposing for natural gas to provide some change. It could be great help because with the sale of these natural gas, we can diversify not only in the renewable energy area, but non-renewable energies who can help to diversify economy and especially to have an economic support within the sale of all of these. That will be great to step out from underdevelopment. Well, now that you are mentioning about the outages, in Mérida, Mexico, 3 days ago, there was an outage in the entire peninsula of Yucatan. Like 3 days, they didn't have electricity at all for 5 hours approximately. Well, it was really bad for us. And I'm telling you this because, and I'm going to ask you about this. And it was awful because I said, okay, I have to go back to my house. I have no penny because I pay everything with credit card. I want to pay, but since there is no electricity, how can I pay? Because the data fast machines didn't work out, didn't work. ATMs didn't work. There were no ATMs. So in nowhere we were able to get. It was like the end of the world to me, in the sense that in the world that we're living in and the communities that provides energy, how they puts us in this situation, in Ecuador. How do you leave this outage? How did you go through that specifically? Well, within Ecuador, there are millionaire losses every single day because of these blackouts, because we paralyze everything. We have the subway, people cannot mobilize to their work. We had to stop banks. We had to stop the productive sector. This is something that for the youth who live in there, and all the people who are working in energy, to provide very quick solutions, because it was like an SOS that we needed someone that to come and help us to solve this problem. And if we didn't know about the solutions of our people, no one is going to rescue us. So we had to open these type of spaces so that we can start emphasizing on the different professionals and youngsters can study about this, to study in different countries. And these ideas I'm trying to also resonate in my own country, and to be able to face these outages. Anyone else who has gone through any blackouts recently in the countries? Could you tell us? Yes, we have like 2 or 3 people there. Sorry that I cut you off. Energy is a right, and we must mention what a right is: to the right of living, to the good way of living. Only South American countries, I think we could see that, or we can experience outages. In my country, there were a lot of deaths because we didn't have electricity. Some people are connected within their own homes to artificial life. They were connected to these machines. And having a 12-hour blackout, there were many deaths in Ecuador. We are not only violating the right to energy, it's not a luxury, it's the right for the good way of living. Let's move on with Jeffrey. Okay, Jeffrey, in regard to the technology, how have you developed innovation in video games? What is the role that you think education plays in to accelerate renewable energies and the option of more climate awareness, and how video games can comply with this role. Thank you so much. Well, education plays a key role. And then this is, they are these change makers, and the children have to understand they have to in the terms of the fossil fuel. We have in these type of actions, we must see they're willing. The sustainable practices in education is intrinsically related to the SDGs. This is like a critical aspect. We try to see how video games foster some type of habits that can be part of our subconscious mind. That's why so many people and these are things that these video games attract these young people, and we are trying to link this and to see the projection of the, and we see the different crises that is going on. So through video games, we can foster and transform the education and learning in a very practical and learning for the youth. We have interactive missions where the children do not only get to know about this, but they experience the consequences or the cases in which they don't take any measures and they have to face different rivals and different missions where they have to confront when they do not when they don't when they are not careful about the environment. So through these video games, and that this is a bridge in terms of sustainability and clean energies in an inclusive way and effectively. This is essential and in the educational innovation in regard to the world, because this is an unprecedented innovation. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. So this way about learning through the games and very, very interactive, and everything that you are saying about the subconscious mind and how this can be so immersive in learning, of course, this can make a huge difference. Thank you so much. And okay, now we're going to continue with Larissa. Thank you so much, Larissa. Well, you were talking about the NDCs and how you work in the policies of climate change in Honduras. How do you visualize the role of the youth to accelerate the energy transition? And what are those mechanisms that you consider necessary that may have a big weight on the design of these climate instruments? Also, how do you see that these young contributions can help transform the goals that they are putting forward? Well, to build climate policies in the countries has its own complexities. And since there is a young person, since I am a young person, as part of the process, I have had these great experiences, but also they have been been very difficult because when you are outside parts of the process, you just dream about it. And we become very dreamy. Okay, you say, okay, I want to do this. I propose this solution. I'm proposing it. It's very easy. But let's say, okay, we are going to improve the energy efficiency. Let's go to the certification of buildings with LEED and A's to improve energy efficiency and increase energy efficiency in the country. And then I propose this as a youngster and who is part of the process. It's not as easy because we need a lot of regulation and legislation enabling laws so that the integration of the youth in the process of policies for energy purposes and climate purposes can actually have an influence in the process, because many times the youth is called to the socialization, but not to be part or become part of the process itself, unless you are a consultant, unless you are a cooperating party, or that you are within an institution. So, but there's the second limitation, and that is when I am in the process of building together with the technical team of the NDCs or the long-term strategy LTLEADs, as it is known, we have to integrate the youth, we have to engage them and the civil organizations. So we started to check the enabling framework, and we see that in the law of climate change. And but I think this organization is not known by the organization. And then to participate in, we have identified that the law of climate change only recognizes that is for the different NGOs, but there's always this conflict of interest and the conflict of roles within the entire groups. And when we have to integrate the academia, we realize that the academia has these young groups and they're focused on the educational part. So we have to raise awareness and how to integrate, how they can become familiar with the instrument, what is their purpose, and their main purpose, because these instruments have its own purpose. And they have also a guideline that they have to comply with, as it is stated by the convention, because afterwards, the country will have to provide a report, which is the biennial reports about the awareness of climate change. And that's where the convention starts evaluating the country in terms of their level of compliance. When Honduras submitted the biennial report of transparency, we realized that the NTC has moved forward in nothing, absolutely nothing. We had no enabling frameworks. We didn't have cross-cutting pillars. We proposed several insignificant goals where there was an inclusion, a social inclusion component, where we said that there's going to be a group of youth that we're going to have at least 2 workshops where the youth can engage within the update of the law of climate change so that they can have the role. So nothing was done at all. That's where I bring some messages that the minister mentioned and that the executive director of OLADE stated, and the provost and rectors of the university said, it is a dream that were written, but there is no implementation to them. So once we enter these processes, we start entering this conflict, the conflict that I keep having all the time. As a youngster, okay, I say, how do I make this functional? How do I leave a contribution together with a team that, in fact, the youth is going to adopt and to identify themselves within the institutionalization of these measures, and how the Energy Secretariat proposes that they are going to train or transfer technology, knowledge to youth or our beneficiary community. That's where we have the real, actual challenge. Because to begin with, I would like to ask the Secretariat, do we have technical capacity? Do we have financing? Say, no. That's when we start doing the entire roadmap of what we actually needed to do for national integration, and that the implementation does not remain only paper, it is reality. We have created like a list or a criteria, checklist of criteria, what we have to do so that this can actually work. To have enabling frameworks that will integrate and to be inclusive, and that in fact can include the engagement of the youth. That's why Honduras currently is trying to update the law of climate change. But that's our first gap. Many times I have mentioned, as it was mentioned, there's a denial of the climate change, especially as governments. So currently, they don't want to boost all this theme where we are bumping into the first barrier. The second barrier, assuming that we overcome the regulatory framework, is to get financing, to get funding, so that we can actually strengthen as the youth and to be able to engage in the process. This has its own complexity as well. Throughout this process, I have always said that NDC should be a channel of financing, but to be able to channel that, we need to understand where the money is. We have to identify what are those cooperating parties that has these budget items that will support transition, especially in the transfer of capacities and technology, and to identify what are those needs within the energy sector in Honduras. We talk very little about energy transition because, or energy poverty, how to boost these processes through some measure that would be focused, influencing, advocate within it. So we have this checklist. We realize that we have so many challenges and difficulties that as government first we must overcome, and then to integrate them. Institutionalization. There is a role of organizations, and it is always the civil organizations that are having a very important role more than others. There's also a lack of organization where there is no integrity in these organizations that are not constituted. They actually represent or integrate their proposals because we are in this conflict. This is a little bit, this falls into the overall side. We are technicians will not out of this process, but the youth has a very important role, because this is something that, as I have always said, in the different spaces that have been able to participate, we have this decision of where we want to head to, where we want to lead our nations, our countries. And since I am within these processes, I'm always very, very careful to understand whether is this what we want to actually integrate this, is this going to work out? Are we being responsible? This is what was said in the morning. Part of our dreams is to be responsible for the decisions that we are making. And when we take a role of such a decision where we can contribute and that this can pivot the instrument, then you have a greater responsibility, and you have to take upon this responsibility and to take these spaces whenever they are enabled. Because if we are not responsible and we don't take these spaces responsibly, then we are turning into the very repetitive system as usual, I'm always fearful that at some point my chip is going to, my mental chip is going to change. And then that we become cynical. What do I mean by that? With cynical. We know that it doesn't matter how much we update these instruments, it's going to end up just in paper. I don't want that. As a young person, I don't want to become cynical. And I have the opportunity to be in this space, and just because I do a job or because I want to pull off an instrument or a paper, is this going to become insignificant? I said, no, this instrument has to be significant. This has to have the proper circumstances and to be able to integrate all the needs that each one of the institutions and in the energy sector, and to be integrated into the process. So when you assess and you tried and government, but there's also that that how as a young you are going to allow this dream to become true. In my case, I don't want to become a cynical just to update instruments just because. I have this responsibility, take upon this responsibility, and to say that I can make these instruments something that can actually work and integrate all those things, both of women and the youth, and also the indigenous communities who are the most vulnerable within this transition process, especially in the energy transition process. Thank you. Thank you so much, and applause to Larissa. Sometimes we have to be very clear about this cynical piece, and sometimes that the personal wills can actually change. It is important to incorporate the youth because that's our role, actually, is to say all these things that perhaps at some point they become uncomfortable, but they must be said. That's where the youth can take this fresh mindset and to have this hope in heart that things can change. And also the intergenerational piece, which is extremely important, is something that has been worked in the different countries and with different ministers and OLADE. And on the how, the role of the youth, and also the experience of those who already know about these reference frameworks and to have better outcomes. Well, the last question, that would be for Kata. Kata. Now that you are in the electromobility and hydrogen sector, I think that many of us are quite interested in this. What have you seen as one of the challenges that we can face, or how to visualize the hydrogen subject matter in Chile? Well, very briefly, in terms of hydrogen in Chile, since we are pushing through the government that there is a national strategy for green hydrogen, companies are also investing in different projects. They are building stations to produce hydrogen. In my case, what we did in terms of hydrogen, that was a private partnership where they dare to invest in this because we had great results. But this is like the first step that we are taking, because so that hydrogen to be more effective and feasible, we must produce massively other things. There is more production of hydrogen that's needed. Now, most part of hydrogen that is being produced is gray hydrogen instead of green hydrogen, because so far we need more electrolyzers, for instance. This is a technology that I want to implement. We need investment. That has to be implemented in different sectors. But I see this with open eyes, because I think that these eyes are looking. This is like a systemic orientation. Also, hydrogen has its own complexities in the sense that we must storage at very high pressure We need also to transport. This is the smallest element that exists. There's always micro leaks of hydrogen. Materials that store them have to improve in the course of time. There's a lot of technology, sense of production, storage, and transportation. And the final use, of course, where the entire chain needs new advances and technological development. And most investment, of course. Like this is like an overview, what you may ask. Thank you so much, Valentina. Valentina, sorry. I'm sorry. Catalina, I'm sorry. Well, now that we have Kata here tomorrow, we have a visit, we have 3 more spaces here. If you would like to add to these spaces where we are going to be visiting in Rancagua. Rancagua, this is in the Reborn. We are going to show a little bit how they work on this a lot. Well, yes, the factory of buses in Rancagua, 90 kilometers at the south, away from the south of Santiago de Chile. The factory, well, we have the hulls of the cars, of the buses. We buy the hulls of the chassis, the components like batteries, the engines. So what we do is to bring these together. We did like the brain of the bus. We do all the control boxes, the distribution boxes, and the different cables and the software that integrates it in all the components. That's what we actually do in Reborn. This is what you're going to see, step process of manufacturing in this factory. All of those who, of course, come from abroad, it will be a great opportunity for you to be able to see and visit this factory. I don't know if anyone else would like to pose any question from the audience. That probably any question that you would like to address to any of the specific speakers. I guess we have like 2, 3, or 4. Yes, let's get started. This is between the different countries of the region to be able to move forward in these actors of the energy. Okay, I'm going to start here. I think that this is strategically convenient that among the countries, those who are in Central America. So this is through SICA where we, environmental climate issues, in energy, we have some regional goals. Here I have the data, but there's an integration. Actually, the final responsibility at the end of the day is of the country itself. But through that regional strategy, of course, we can channel financing, and this will support initiatives of transfer of technology and knowledge can come to the country, because that provides a greater facility. In Central America, we can carry out these type of strategies. There's been one of energy efficiency. Practically, right now, the region is focused on the forestry issues. Many of the projects are focused on forestry and water, especially sanitation and drinking water. The advantage with energy here is that somehow we have moved forward a lot. We have good regulations. We have a more comprehensive energy markets. Countries are moving forward, some more than others. Some have their national policies in place, and the regional strategies can do more than that. Otherwise, we will need energy policies, and the situation can become more complex. But these are functional, not at a macro level, but they have very good impact within the countries. Would you like to address the question? Yes, I was thinking a little bit about the question. I wanted to mention that I believe we have great human capital. I would like to say that it would be great to have these a greater relationship among the universities, and that students can start developing with a common objective, and this can actually come from the academia, and to be relating in different spaces like this one. I think it's very positive to keep boosting them as students. Excellent. Thank you so much. Two more questions, please. Okay. Well, in fact, thank you so much for your great participation and a great experience. My question is addressed to Guillermo. Although your energy matrix, as you said, 90% is based on hydropower, how do you see in terms of vulnerability and the energy contracts with some companies in your country, and how natural gas can somehow support by the new technologies? How can this become a key resource for diversification and to provide stability to the energy matrix that you have? Well, this is a good question. I like this term about vulnerability. I will, about the word, it would be vulnerability. Um, I had the opportunity to work in Repsol, Spain, and the opportunity let me know how that big company explored minerals. The exploration find a natural resource. We're talking about 20 to 30 years of exploration. It is not a small number. You can say we can say that in 2 or 3 years we can have a reservoir. It actually needs many, many studies. I have the opportunity to work with them. And basically, it was a wonderful experience because they told me that Repsol was still operating in Ecuador, and they said, Guillermo, it is really bad that when we come to Ecuador, nobody knew about oil and the barrels that we produce. We got 80 and you remain with 20. It was knowledge. That oil was from Ecuador, but Spain was taking most of it. That part of vulnerability, I like it very much because we are unaware of so many things. And shortly, we are going to enter the natural gas environment. We need for all Ecuadorians to be involved in natural gas. Unfortunately, ignorance has left a destroyed jungle. We have the Chevron Texaco case, which is an international news. It has been destroyed because of not being aware. Natural gas is going to come in as a support, and we need for the academia and the technical aspect be working together. As I mentioned to my students at the university, I have said, you can become the best technicians. You can drill to up to 8 wells in a few months. But if we do not handle the criteria that we need to take into account, then we are not going to go anywhere. That's unfortunately the underdevelopment. In South America, we have a wonderful idea. We have great human talent in Latin America. We're really good, but unfortunately, we don't have the support or the spaces to be able to be heard as young people. That's what I tried to teach my students, to become, to have this critical thinking and to raise their voices. Right now, we have very good platforms and networking. We can become aware of that and try to boost these type of ideas that can take us out of, that can bring us out of underdevelopment. The idea is to focus on the technical aspect and to become critical. Otherwise, because if it is pointless if we know a lot and we do nothing. we always have to have this piece of the dialogue and to convey everything that we learn. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you thank you for this. I would like to deepen a little bit in what Larissa mentioned about the main challenges, about the enabling frameworks, financing. Could you please let us know what strategies or what type of innovation would we need to face these challenges? I believe that these challenges are cross-cutting. Could you please provide any strategy, or where should we focus, or what type of innovation do we need to counteract these issues? Yes, indeed, there are three things. Basically, how from the legislation we enable, once it is enabled, how we integrate, and once integrated, how do we implement it? So to me, these are these three phases. Initially, what we've been doing in Honduras and many of the regions, what we do is review the legislation and to understand what enables what. And starting from that review and analysis from the legislation point of view, we start working on integration. Honduras reviewed the law of climate change. This is being updated as we speak, and there were several voids that didn't enable some institutions or disabled some institutions and that couldn't provide support. So this review was seeking an integration, but a more formal integration that is not exclusive of saying we are going to enable such and such civil organization, but to be more comprehensive and cross-cutting, where we don't have to put in the law an article that may state we are going to enable each one of the civil organizations or the academia, but we're seeking to enable all the articles of the legislation or the law so that each member can be part of these spaces. The second, which is the integration or coordination, is the complex piece of the process, because you must put together everything and to do a mapping of the institutions of the civil organization that are actually contributing, that actually advocate within the processes. Because although in our countries we make these inventories and pull out many organizations contributing in specific issues, in the case of Honduras, we don't have many civil organizations that will support the energy sector. Only the organizations of the business people that generate the electricity and renewables and fossil fuels. So we should start mapping and identifying these different stakeholders and to integrate them. Also, these organizations receive or channel some type of financing. Many times they are unaware of the political or structural pieces of the instrument as such. But they need the instrument anyway, because I'm going to give you a case. An NDC works to channel funding. If you have a measure that says, okay, we are going to have some strategies that will integrate electrical mobility, energy efficiency, then you come as a civil society, you channel some type of funding, and within those arguments or circumstances, you say, okay, the country in its NDC committed to strengthened energy efficiency. So you are channeling funding through an NDC. And this is not always seen, at least in Honduras, we're trying to civilize and to try to socialize. If you channel the funding, because that's the issue, that civil society has a technical capacity and great management. You can see right here, all the organizations that we have here and the youth are part, and they have an integrated, comprehensive logistics that the government doesn't have. And we must understand this difference. Logistics and this technical capacity that civil organizations have is wonderful, because this is done by people because they love art, they love these topics that are a passion to them, and it's not just a simple word. That is the difference, that civil society has these facility to channel funds unlike the government. So we must find strategically how to visualize that we both need each other and that we can work in some type of integration. And there we can complete the last phase to be able to implement together. We are working in a financing strategy that mobilizes both private, public, and sectors and civilians to be able to implement these strategies in the NDCs and to have a strategic partnership among private and public sectors as well as civilians. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you for questions and answers. And before ending this panel, I would like to provide three key messages. One, on Thursday, October 2nd, we're going to launch a documentary. It's called Algo Huele Mal, Something Smells Bad. And we're going to talk about the energy transition of Chile and Mexico. And this is going to be a very interesting event. This is full of art and activities. There's going to be a panel. Then we have OLADE, and they participated. Also, if you want to raise your hand so that people get to know you and people can approach you and talk about that, your profiles are really good. It would be great if they get to know you. It's about most people here. So people are, we will be able to get to know you. This is a panel that is organized by a very interesting organization here in Chile. And also they are going to talk about energy transition. And that will be basically the message. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. We had this great experience with you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists for this wonderful conversation and its moderator, Axell. We go straight now to panel number 3, called Transition for Justice, Energy Justice in Dispute. Thanks to our panelists. And to start this new panel, we would like to invite a step up by Mateo Cortez, who's going to moderate this panel. Thank you, everyone. We are going to start the next panel. Thank you so much. We're really happy to be here and to thank you, especially OLADE, for this space and to be able to work here and to create this piece that we believe is very important for the youth. I think that the way and the catalyst to get an active participation in every environment starts from this type of spaces. Also, thank you, OLADE, who is our co-leader within this panel, and all the strategic allies. Well, first of all, what I wanted to mention is that the purpose of this panel, of panel number 3, that is called Energy Transition Dispute, is to try to understand that the processes of energy transition are processes not only of technological change, but of socioeconomic transformation that has direct impacts in the lives of people. That's why our purpose here is to show the different realities in an intersectional way, from a view with a perspective of gender, of indigenous communities, Guatemala, Colombia, Chile, Brazil, and to be able to present basically what their realities in energy transition has been on site on their own territories. And I'm going to introduce, first of all, I have beside me Natalia Mapua. She is a social environmental activist, indigenous, that has a bachelor degree in policies and works in the policies for Amazonian culture. We have also Everilda Perez. She is a scholar of OLADE. She's a member of the NGO Poder Maya, and her labor is focused on the implementation of photovoltaic solar power in the communities in Guatemala. And then we have Josefina Guacte. This is also she's from the region of Tarapacá here in Chile, from the indigenous communities, a student of architecture. And her work focuses on the education, the recovery of public spaces, and the organization of workshops. That she is also part of the Wechekeche, which is an organization of young indigenous leaders in the work in energy transition issues. And lastly, especially we have Sebastián Orellana, who is a professional of social sciences, bachelor's degree in sociology. He worked as executive coordinator in the network of energy poverty. Finally, online, we have Yanderi Pausayu, who is from the YU indigenous community of Colombia. She has a degree in international relations, trained in the human rights, and also works on the energy policies. To work a little bit to start this conversation, we have a few dynamics that we are not going to be able to provide because of time constraints, but I would like to start by asking on what have been your experiences with energy transition, with the renewable energies locally and nationally? How has this transition been unfolding within the region? Let's get started with you, Natalia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think that talking about energy transition is a very difficult topic to talk about. Talk about the energy justice transition is harder because we're going through different crises because, and unlike other panels, we have already been discussing about the people who intervene previously. They talk about in our context that is quite challenging, and at the same time, we are trying to reach more and more youth. I'm talking from a place that I come from indigenous communities, and our territories have been touched by all these, and our communities and social articulations also have involved in the energy transition matters. I am the coordinator of an alliance. It's called Alliance of Youth for Energy Governance. This is a coalition of several organizations coming from the youth, and I've been working with climate change. In 2023, we were together and we started to understand that we were quite distant from this subject matter, and how at the same time channel this to change the components. So we see that the community takes ownership and they self-manage this type of activities and energy. Unfortunately, the government has not been able to tackle these issues nationwide or locally because they regard this as something something basic they discuss a lot about renewables, but these communities lack this type of service. So through these different organizations, we let people know about these projects so that people take ownership about these type of energies. Because in fact, these are communities where Spanish is not spoken. They speak in their own languages. So these also some type of restrictions. So we have to find strategies and alternatives so that the information is well conveyed and completely. Because many times these information reach there, but they don't reach 100%. Yes, being a challenge, but we have accomplished for the communities to take ownership of these type of energies, but they also self-manage. They strengthened their leadership so that they become the leaders and the main actors or the main protagonists of or the main characters of this development. This is not just this is to contribute to reduce the gaps of inequality in education, which is very stressed in these territories. Well, I am representing Wechekeche kind of as Matthias mentioned. To talk a little bit about what we're doing as indigenous youngsters, it is important to say what we did throughout the year. We wanted to carry out the first encounter of indigenous youth in Chile nationwide. It was an important event that took place in Quito. Well, what was the idea? Well, the idea is to have a specific theme. That was to prepare ourselves for the transition. There is a lot of discussions about green energy, just and the possibility to take care of the earth differently. But what's that transition for? Because we have discussed many times that is very simple. It is much more simple to discuss about transition when you do not live in the indigenous spaces. I belonged to the Quechua peoples in Maria that we occupied great territory. This is dry territory with under special and complex conditions. So talking about projects, solar power, and huge facilities. It touches our own traditions and cosmovision, our customs. That's very delicate. And also to think about the possibilities at community scale or locally, it is also complex because of those who inhabit those territories are the elderly. Many of us have had to migrate to study and to access and to well educated and then come back to our own territories. It is very difficult. Is thinking that reaching the means there is no further possibilities just to, but we have to city conditions up there are brutal. They're very harsh, and but the elderly are reluctant to this. And thinking about this project is almost impossible because costs are extremely high. Facilities are very tedious, and many times when we have these small changes, they last very little because we have to call someone for any repairs. Sometimes these people come here, they don't do this properly or correctly because there's a lot of new technology and it don't work. So as a young indigenous here, we are getting ready, and from the encounter of indigenous, we started the different youth networks that have been called by the different indigenous groups, and that's how we are getting ready and prepared. Thank you, Josefina. Sebastian, we would like to know a little bit about the perspective, your perspective in regard to the work with the youth, and especially the perspective from energy poverty. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for all the presentations right now. Thank you so much. I know that you all are hungry, and thank you so much for staying. Well, the organization through this panel, which is extremely important, from RedP organization in the context, we've been working since 2016, almost 10 years. We've been bringing together and coordinating nearly 200 members who work because they're concerned about working in the energy equality, equity. In Chile, energy poverty, which is the access or non-access of energy in the households, firstly, this was important because in the south they use biofuels that contaminate, and of course it becomes more less efficient. And then we have the energy equity in abstract terms, and ever since we've been working on that, and we've been tackling energy transition in Chile. Energy transition in Chile. Well, the initial words they talked a little bit about that. It has taken a while, and this is a country that relatively has advanced in terms of energy transition. If we consider that 40% is in non-conventional renewable energy. So our concern about the access to users, we realize that there is some type of separation and gap on how we tackle the energy issues, because on the one hand, energy prices, people are spending a lot to have these warm homes, as we call it in Chile. Also from generation. Of course, there are some technical issues that are difficult to articulate. They worked in the first document to tackle energy transition that tried to tackle the different dimensions and different scales and how energy transition affects households, neighborhoods, cities, and larger territories as well. There we can see how energy transition is taking place in Chile because of in terms of cause and the history of our economic model, especially the mega projects, stakeholders in energy transition that sometimes they come from other industries and other types of energies, some contaminant, and also from hydropower, mining. Is industrial stakeholders come into play in energy transition. It's very difficult to have a discussion and to have priorities set at country level about the energy transition, going beyond the change of technology or using technologies that decarbonize energy transition from vision in the Industrial Revolution. Also, many people talk about slavery. That was also an energy transition. They try to visualize they have an impact and about equalities and rights. And what we're looking for is to see the importance of these discussions to guarantee access to energy, the rights of energy, which are topics that are being discussed as well, and to work by coordinating different people. And something that is very important in Chile nowadays is that there is a group of organizations, and here we have the people working here, they're outside of this conference room, but we lead a developed energy transition between quads, and that has been unfolding. And also the discomfort that and the concerns that this has occurred within civil society. Now they have been able to materialize and to create an articulated network of organizations with all these concerns that are working on tackling this issue. This is just to let you know about our optimistic side of the process. Okay, Yanderi, in regard to the position, the perspective of the Wayu people, Solaje, and Colombia, how has this unfolded? Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much to Sales Chile and OLADE for providing me this space. Greetings to Natalia, Everilda, Josefina, and Sebastian, and Matthias for inviting me, for being here. First of all, to talk about the local part, I am from the Wayuu peoples in Colombia, and our territory is located in the high and middle Guajira. The territory here is quite rich in minerals. There's always been the exploitation of natural resources, starting from salt. Then there was the exploitation of coal in the open air that still goes on in the territory. And as of 2009, they started to talk about large-scale projects. And energy based on solar and wind power. But the territory has suffered historically from exclusion. And currently, the 90% of the population does not count on electricity. And this is one of the most of the poorest areas in Colombia, and we have indigenous peoples that are in the surroundings. So I think that in Latin America, our indigenous communities are suffering the same problems, although they are in different sites, different locations. And what Josefina just said, well, my territory is also desert land. And the way of life is very difficult. The access to water is difficult. And health and education is one of the lowest in Colombia. In this case, there is no interest by the organizations and the state itself to be able to discuss about this and find solutions that could benefit the territories on site. With this, I would like to say that I represented the Observatory, Latin American Observatory of Energy Policy. We have several nationalities involved, and this is one of the tools that have led us to understand energy transition and to be able to support them in some projects. Some of the projects that we have worked on from OLADE. And there is a project that we've been working for 5 years. And this is implemented in Tamishawi. This is implemented in indigenous peoples in the Amazon of Peru. This project was placed in that community, and this started as from the pandemics. That territory, there is no electricity or connectivity. We started with a prototype so that they could access online classes. Then we realized that the problem was much larger, and we wanted to support the community with a broader project and provide connectivity to the entire village. We've been moving forward year after year in this project. The third phase was carried out back in 2023, which was the implementation of solar panels that would feed up these satellite internet so that the community can communicate between each other. And in last July, actually, we implemented the third phase of the project. And this entailed to install in the community 40 solar panels for 40 households. The fact is that behind this, there is a lot of complexity because we needed funding, logistics, and to work with several people in different countries and to be able to concur with the time zones and the schedules. because most of us, we have to work. We had to consider the work within this project in order to comply with the community. That was quite a challenge, but thanks to a wonderful team that we put together and that is part of this observatory, we were able to meet the deadline and to deliver a wonderful project to the community. Within the community, we also observed that it is not only about installing and providing access to solar energy, but it also entails in terms of gender equity, because many women who carried out these workshops so that they learn to handle and install the equipment themselves. Many women came into play, and so they took these courses delivered by the technicians at the time so that they can make this work within their own homes. So this work that we do as youth, indigenous, these tackle many, many issues. It is not just about working with the access to energy. So I believe there is still a long way to go. We want to replicate this project in several communities. Currently, we are working to take these to the high and middle areas of Guajira. We hope that we can adapt this to the social cultural issues of each one of the communities, as we did with the first project in Alto Mishagua. Thank you so much, Yanderi. Now taking or continue with your words and about these experiences that we have had from OLADE and the previous Maya in terms of the implementation of photovoltaic projects at a residential level, for instance, and also taking into account the experience of Josefina and Natalia, we understand as well that there are certain inequality gaps that go beyond the access to renewables. So we're talking about sustainability in time. That is what happens when the systems do not work, who's there, what's the knowledge within the community, are there technicians who are capable to fix these issues? These issues are extremely important. So I wanted to open this question to you who would like to answer it. But the question is about how do you see the relation between the local communities as well as the private sector and public sector, not only in terms of governance, but also thinking about the distribution of benefits and the sustainability of these projects in the course of time. Not that they just come here, they leave it there, and then no one gets involved, but to actually integrate this in the community. So who would like to address this question? Well, from our experience, we must stand out that the European Union came to Guatemala through a partnership with the government. They came into the different educational units because they bet on needs with implementation of solar panels. They left it there, but they didn't install capacities in the community. 2 years later, these systems collapsed. There was no involvement of the community itself, so that the community take ownership of these projects. So from that point forward, the community resented that because they wanted to know how these work, because this is a new technology that came in. Unfortunately, no one told them how this works and how and what are the benefits, and the system just stay there. So when we got there, we saw the systems, and when asking the community, they said, well, in the government, indeed, we don't want to know anything about this. Why? Because within these communities, mainly in the high part of Guatemala, there are some hydropower stations. This was part of the government, but the government actually sold this to big companies. However, the communities have these services, electricity, water. So there was a breakup between the community and the government. And in addition to that, the government has an energy plan that is just in writing. What has been written is not fulfilled. So we see that there is a zero relationship between the government and the community sector. Therefore, it is important to stand this out because it's not just about coming with the project, leaving it there, but to provide the capacity installation and to learn about from the people who provide this type of energies, because these projects must be well advanced in other countries, but in my country, it's still an issue that is barely reaching these communities. So it is important to manage the local capacities as well as the involvement of women, because it has always been said that in terms of energy, in terms of technology, it's the man who should have this knowledge, and usually women stay home. But we're breaking these barriers so that women can become involved in these processes and to be aware of these type of technologies, and that at some point, whenever there is some failures, women are capable to sort it out. This is a very hard work because as an organization, we are right there. It's some part of the government, but there is no concrete relationship. There is a division both in the NGOs, the community organizations, and the government. That's a huge challenge that we have as an organization, to be constant, but also to find out how we can bring together the NGO sector, community, government, as well as the private companies, so that they can provide these benefits and to have a sustainable project in the course of time. I think that I can start by talking about the history of the generations and the peoples, the relationship with the private and public sector. To us as indigenous, memory is extremely important, and our memory, we have so many memories in the moments where we had our rights, but they were violated and invaded by the government and by companies that they just invaded the territories. And they just make projects without any prior informed consultation. And this is guaranteed by the law, but up to this date, we are under discussions, but these are not guaranteed or protected by the companies or the government. And usually every time that we have projects and constructions on site, this is not a place or regarded as something important, and it is not done within these sites. We don't have good relations, historically speaking, and this is a way of protection, because every time that we try to protect our territories and we let these people enter these, they do bad things and they mainly violated our rights. Now we are more open and we have more knowledge, so that when we undergo this type of negotiations, our realities, our cosmovision, and our visions and culture should be taken into account within this project. But it is very difficult many times because the understanding of the indigenous life and the histories and how we is extremely different for those people who are not indigenous. So I always see that there are so many conflicts, mainly because our life and culture and the right of indigenous peoples is not regarded as something important within these projects. And it's always about the economic interest, and they disregard our own interests. So I think that globally, there has been some solutions that have been proposed globally, but still we have some difficulties, because in these spaces, especially in the decision making, there are not many representation from indigenous peoples. Even within the local governments, there are no indigenous getting involved in this decision-making process. And we have these spaces where we want to place our voices, to raise our voices, and we have to talk about realities. If we do not talk about realities, we cannot reach to concrete solutions. That's why there are some tools that in the community, there are sometimes that there is some project, and then after this project, this is a project. There's a project I would like to talk about. This is called Electricista. This is a project of the Brazilian Amazon region. This comes from a governmental organization where they deliver courses within indigenous territories so that women learn how to manage the solar panels and how to do maintenance. This is important so that electricity within the indigenous territories, like with solar power, can be working and operating properly and contemplating the needs of these peoples when they use these solar panels. This project was the initiative by an organization that is composed of indigenous people. They did the entire project and construction based on the need as from a consultation and asking the territories trying to understand what they need. They need only solar panels, or they needed to understand the operation, maintenance, and how to use it properly. I believe that an important issue is the consultation, because to me it is so easy to think is better, but consultation can actually solve a lot of issues and to reach to these concrete solutions. Josefina. I think it is also important to mention that it's quite complex from the indigenous communities where we have to regard to access a better education. I'm thinking about these private-public relationship because when we leave our territories, a part of us remains, but others are here. That is a difficulty and a constant psychological burden. This is a constant pain thinking about perhaps of these public-private relationship, which is quite deficient, at least with indigenous peoples here in Chile. That's the experience I can talk about, of course. Can happen tomorrow? Will it constantly pending? We have this part of we hope that this territory keeps existing tomorrow. And it's quite complex because we don't have the right ways. I think that up to this date, there are clear conflicts on indigenous peoples, and they're difficult to manage right now because we are not willing to give in a little. We shouldn't, actually, because there are some difficulties of asymmetry with the elderly. There are consultations that take place, understanding that the elderly does not count, and many times we do not count on the knowledge of the technical terms that are going to be informing those places. We lack training, technical assistance, and sometimes our communities do not count on those funding to cause that done. So that synergy and that dialogue that is created is fundamental, but it's complex as well. There's a lack of transparency, a huge lack of transparency. At the north, I see my colleagues, Nakanantai, Yayita, Naimara, our Mapuche brothers also, nationwide, this keeps happening. The non-recognition of our ancestral practices, so we see in the north, they want to install projects in the middle of those sites without thinking on how we have inhabited those territories ancestrally speaking. And all those practices are not known. So that relationship between the public-private do not recognize, do not understand, do not comprehend, and don't have the intention to do so, we're not going to be able to move forward. Yes, following to what our colleague just said, I think in general, to find these partnerships between sectors, we have to be very careful to understand the different conflicts in place and that affect not only before but currently. And we can't foresee that they are going to keep going, especially against the communities and the different territories. And in that regard, I think that we must be careful with certain things that are happening in terms of energy transition and the support to the project, such as training and all those things that many times these are ways that do not entail much investment. They can have different stakeholders to clean a little bit the image, and so forth and so on. And it's important to mention this. And about the question directly, well, I believe that we must regard the energy transition as whether this is just or not, to create this social fabric. We have also to decentralize and how we coordinate the different stage of the life cycle of energy, so the users of energy can be closer to the generation of energy to decrease the impacts and to benefit, to have a direct benefit and to create sovereignty in energy. Also, this technical assistance investment must be focused on creating that social fabric. And based on that, I wanted to escalate a little bit that comment, that conversation, because I think that we must regard sustainability as something more complex. It is not only as part of the support and financing, but to think also what we are going to do with environmental liabilities and in different types of waste created by these projects, and also social environmental sustainability. This has to deal with strategies and mechanisms of engagement, transparency, so that people can engage and provide sustainability to the general model of energy transition. I think that nowadays we are living or going through certain processes, especially in the past few months, where some measures and legislation has been sanctioned, and this is going to increase the utilization of projects and the discomfort in terms of environment that has happened already in Chile. We have to think on how we're going to manage the risks that we take upon as a society towards the environment, but also the society itself. How sustainable is this model until we have like a new eruption of social discomfort? So these things should be also considered when they're making this project. Well, this is largely what you just say and what we're seeking in this protection. I don't know, Yanderi, would you like to add to what has been discussed here? Well, listening to our colleagues, I fully agree on what has been said, because our territories have the same problems as they have been mentioned. Well, first of all, talking about La Guajira, my territory itself, the high middle Guajira. The case of the prior consultation has been a huge problem because these are not done. And if they're done, these are done after once the state has delivered the projects to the companies. So to these corporations, so they do not take into account what the community has to say. The social environmental studies are not carried out. What does this entail? And why do we reach all to all of this, because we, as from the territory, have no knowledge or are not aware of the renewable energies, the energy, just energy, or the implementation of all these projects. On the other hand, it is misinterpreted the ways of life of the communities so that they can be placed within the projects. That's why there is a lot of poverty in the communities that are rural. They always have to be below the communities that are going to be benefited by these type of projects. Because in La Guajira, most part of the population does not have electricity. So this energy just feeds up the large cities in Colombia. It's always been the same dynamics for the indigenous peoples, the exclusion, and because we are considered, I don't know, it's like we are not part of the state. And we don't have the same rights, even though we are citizens, among quotes, of each of the country. Another issue that Natalia mentioned was that the little representation that they had in the decision making against issues. From our experience as the OLADE team, what we have seen so far is that both for the indigenous peoples and the youth organizations, the access to financing is quite difficult because most of the financing is provided to large-scale projects. We are working on small-scale projects as from the communities. So what is funded currently, and that takes a big part of that, is the organizations that have been many years that they demand experience. Currently, we have not done, we can have involved in the legal aspect, and that has been an issue to access financing, internationally speaking. With Altam Shower project, we have tried to mitigate some difficulties that we have detected in other projects. For instance, we are implementing monitoring and follow-up of the project that we have installed there. We have a remote monitoring to satellite internet. We also provide follow-up to the equipment of the solar panels. We have tried to provide the capacity to the population itself so that they can, they themselves can be aware of the implementation, so that to know about the components so that they can change whenever necessary, because they already have that knowledge. They themselves replicate this knowledge and learnings to other people of the community. So it is not necessary for them to step out of their territories and find a technician who can help them and to pay for the service. They themselves are able to do this type of maintenance, and they can provide service to other people as well. Our partner in Peru, who deliver these training sessions to the community, they also provide the opportunity to the people so that whenever they are implementing other projects in other communities, they can call these people and they can cooperate this way. They can access to some type of work for limited time, as long as they are implementing this type of project. So these people have access also to certain types of jobs. Another issue that we have another thing that we have implemented is the access of women to understand this technical piece of the equipment used. So it has been a challenge. I think that we have a long way to go and a lot to learn from other organizations, a lot to share between each other. I think that this type of meetings to exchange experience and knowledge among the different organizations and making the reality of the community something much better and to be able to convey the message of each one of the communities and to make this transition to become just. Thank you, Yanderi. Well, an applause to our great panelists and to close this panel and to seize the time right now, we are going to request just 2 or 3 questions. We're going to take all 3 of them at the same time. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3. In the back. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for this interaction space with you. My name is Stefania Gonzalez. I come from Honduras. I work in the Secretariat of Energy, specifically in the unit of social and environmental responsibility. We have a lot of contact with the communities. To us, it is a huge challenge, as you just mentioned. In this regard, I would like to pose the following question. How can we remove that distrust that communities have? Because historically, they have been forsaken by the government themselves in terms of the bureaucracy, not only in terms of financing, but all the administrative processes that we have with the management of these projects. How, as a government or institutions, can remove that distrust somehow? Thank you. Well, good morning. My question would be mainly as the young changers. How impact has your words in front of the authorities as indigenous communities? I'd like to know about your cases because in Panama, we have a very difficult situation due to the fact that only consider the voices of the elderly. I would like to understand this challenge in the case of your communities. And whether the elderly are more open to listen to the youth. Well, hello everyone. Ryan from Chile. I wanted to pose a question to Josefina. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. And the question has to deal with the national policy of lithium in Chile. It's going through that indigenous consultation process in the north. What is your perspective in regard to the national policy of lithium? And Chile has installed this as something urgent. However, I would like to ask you how this experience has unfolded in the northern territory of Chile. Well, hello, my name is Rosalina Linda from Panama. It has been such a great pleasure. I have enjoyed so much to be able to absorb from your knowledge. And you have reminded me that talent has no age, race, no ethnicity, nor has gender. So I would like to ask all panelists if you can share with us 1 or 2 recommendations from your own experiences, how the governments must harvest that knowledge in an inclusive and representative governance. Thank you so much. If you would like to answer, the first question was about the distrust. I don't know if you would like to start from that question. Who would like to answer it? Well, very interesting questions, each one of them. To be able to answer the first question, we have to ask if the government understands the context about the people that they are going to communicate. I think that is very important piece because unfortunately governments come in, step in, but they are completely unaware of the context where they are stepping in. That's where everything starts from our organization and our experience. We are on the opposed side, we're on the other side. The NGO is in the western part and the government is in the eastern part. These are different customs, different language, and different experiences. But in fact, what we're doing as organizations is to try to understand the experience of the people, who are the leaders, who are the decision makers, and what is the importance of the participation of women in these communities. I think that from that information, we can enable that trust to let people know, because it has happened a lot in the country where the government comes, they just extract all the information. But what's the purpose of that information? Who's going to use this information? That's why this trust starts coming up. It is, sometimes people say, no, we are not going to say anything. There are restrictions. This is our territory, and we have closed doors to the government. So the goal is where that information is heading to, what's the purpose? So the idea is to have this transparency by the government to approach the communities, because many times they come in, but they just want to extract some information, that's it. But they have told us, well, we have had the visit of XY ministry, and they told us that we should provide this information. But from that point forward, we know nothing. So that's why it's important that the government understands and know about these contexts, so that the community and the people can actually start this type of conversations, because the government comes in helicopters, in small planes to the communities. They have very difficult access to land there. And they say, okay, yes, I have reached that community. Yeah, but what are the road conditions? What's the language that they speak? So I think that we should start from there so that the government can have that approach, but this should be an actual approach, very transparent, so that we can accomplish all these goals. In regard to the second question about the youth advocacy, well, it is very complex, it's very challenging, because the elderly has this reluctancy with the youth of saying, look, we already have our own experience. You are young people, you just step in, you start creating these projects, you start the conversations, but what, true or not? Actually, this has been a huge challenge. However, creating the spaces of communication between the elderly and the young people have allowed us to create different projects and to advocate actually the communities, not only for the elderly, but the strength, the capacity building from very early stages of the children, so that we can raise awareness to the elderly and to try and to make them understand that the youth can actually advocate. And I think that we have been able to show that from through our projects. And I think because whatever project that I am advocating, which is the electrification of the schools in rural areas, has not only allowed for the children to have access to technology, but also the elderly or adults who have never touched a computer. This has actually influenced so much, so that they believe in us, and to believe in the youth that can make a change, that can have or that can advocate as well. In regard to the first question, I think that an important issue here in Brazil, we are doing a lot of, we have a lot of movements of indigenous. This is within the spaces of the government, like secretariats, municipalities. Sometimes there is this thinking that the peoples must be protected. Okay, there is a secretariat, and someone in the secretariat is going to be responsible for the indigenous people, and that person is going to carry out projects, etc. Of course, this relationship can raise some conflicts. Maybe this could be a poor relationship, but when we are within that secretariat, there are positions performed by the indigenous peoples. But if we have more indigenous people, then there's going to be different, and they are going to, will be in agreement with the peoples. In Brazil, the government of Brazil were trying to create the secretariat. The Ministry of Indigenous in Brazil was created firstly. It has never happened before. And as from this ministry, we were able to have a ministry that is composed only of indigenous peoples and that are tackling different topics like conflicts, languages, and so many other issues that they are tackling so that we can create public policies and to conduct some legal issues and political issues within these communities. Also to have local influences like the creation of secretariats. This was created in my state, it was created in the indigenous secretariat, and so forth and so on. I think that for the FATO to have a repair, this is done through the FATO for the regional peoples. This is within the governments where they make the main decisions about the distribution and public policies. This is crucial so that we can have a better relationship with the peoples. About the second question, it's very difficult, and I use the same words of my colleague, because we have to think that there is different thinking, and not only among the indigenous peoples, but in general, there is so much conflict of understanding of life, etc. But I see that at the same time, this generation is very strategic and smart to get spaces, because we are not in dispute with the elderly. It's just we have to fight the current crisis. And I think that's the main strategy. And that is that the elderly try to understand that we are here to add and not to compete for positions or power. I have a friend called Iniquinipi from Panama. I'm going to be very brief on this. He said that within the indigenous peoples of Panama, Conayana, they have this conflict of generation. Years ago, their strategy to have the youth within the council was through participating with someone, make these narratives together with the elderly, always learning about this. So when they were becoming these reporters, they were listening, they had this letter where they were able to participate. That this was like hidden, this letter was hidden. And then the elderly saw that there were some proposals by the youth. They have to be very, very strategic and try to gain these spaces, perhaps in many ways that people do not understand. Making it is like a reference that does so many work. They do a lot of works about climate change. To me, youth is quite creative. And if we are here, it's because we have the creativity, we have the strength. And in regard to the spaces for the youth, as a government, this is the fourth question. I think that it's quite challenging because within the society, we have some trouble with youth in general. It's not just indigenous youth. This is, as I said, that's where the COP is going to take place. There is no voice for the youth and the rights of the youth. And because due to climate change, it does even worse. We are in the fight to create a secretariat of the youth to try in COP30 to be the scenario to bring about public policies for the youth. This was done, and I'm not saying about indigenous peoples, I'm talking about the youth in general. I think that there are so many problems when we talk about government youth and spaces for the youth, because even the spaces for the youth are not being occupied by the youth, but older people who do not understand the reality of the youth. And when they create projects, programs, and they carry out some actions, they usually do not contemplate the reality of the youth. So if we want for the youth to be participating, we must provide spaces to the youth, actual spaces. Otherwise, we are not going to reach anywhere. Thank you, Natalia. Just to close this up, Josefina, could you please answer the question number 3? And you're going to the third question, you said? Okay. Thank you so much, Roger, for that question. Well, in regard to the national policy of lithium is complex for the Andean regions. When we discuss able to participate in a meeting, quite complex to think that we are in a process that is a close process of elections that is continuation. Lithium is promised and a huge economic investment. There are so many promises in this regard. However, it is very difficult to turn around the TV and to find in the news what the indigenous people say about this issue. It is very difficult to see ourselves in the covers historically. It is almost impossible. And there are very few who listen to each other or who talk to each other. We are not in the covers of the publications. And we think about this battle that already started. It's quite complex because many times we're accused that we don't want any progress for the country, that we are seeking poverty and to stagnate. But I insist on what I said about the first question. It's very simple to talk about progress when you don't live in that territory that they want to exterminate. It's very difficult. And I cried this with my colleagues because we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. Although there are some things that we are getting ready on, there are several youth in the Andean region that have been coordinated, and it's very difficult because there's a lot of technical issues that we have to sort out, and to many areas that we do not belong to. So we have to be attentive to all these areas, because then everything is going to attack us, everything in harming our ancestors and our communities, especially the ecosystems and the species that are already endangered. There's been so many promises, and I have heard many times that we talk about the elderly, about the intentions of transferring systems, of being able to microorganisms from one place to another. That's impossible. That's not going to happen. However, many times they promise so much, they make so many promises that our brothers and sisters believe that. There's so wonderful promises and about the soccer fields and lighting here and there. Dream about that, but that is going to harm, exterminate our territories, places where our ancestors have lived in and that we want to keep living in, and also descendants. I think that's the strongest point of the indigenous organizations. We are going to fight this, and together. It's going to be very difficult. This cross-cutting, as I said, politically speaking, in every vision, in every side and in every sector. But we are going to fight. And we hope to have the support of the other organizations involved, that anyone who would like to protect the land and the earth. Lastly, the last recommendations you can provide to the last question. Well, thank you so much for those words. These are very important words and answering these questions. So the first one, very briefly, I think that many times we should not romanticize the life of communities and experience of communities, in the sense that as an anthropologist, the work that we have been able to do in that line in energy issues, I realize that many times what you think that sometimes when we create something and we believe that they are not going to care about the public policy and all that, they become interested because their scenario has changed a lot. The communities perhaps are not what they used to be 100 years ago, when much of what we imagined was bad. But there are many people, professionals that have become experts in different areas. So there are some facilities to provide a dialogue and to communicate with each other more efficiently in different types of formats and types of languages, et cetera, et cetera. So very briefly on the second question, I wanted to mention that it is extremely important to bring about knowledge in general. I think it is important to create those spaces so the knowledge is communicated horizontally. And I think that generations piece is very important, especially in the context of transitions and changes that we are going through in this century, where the difference between one generation and the other in regard to the experience of life are huge. It's not just a matter of being older or younger, but it's about the technologies that we are exposed to and the changes that we are exposed to, and everything that we have to say about that. We have to value the knowledge from our own experience as well. And then I'd like to recommend to take importance in the interdisciplinary area, not only with the academia, but also the communities, and to bring about or to generate these spaces of consultation. And also, in terms of resources and time, sometimes it's very difficult to put together some working groups. This requires very important efforts and is much more difficult in practice than in paper. But that's a recommendation. We must provide that time and those resources, get the resources and use the resources of other people, and to value that as well. I don't know if anyone else would like to provide the last recommendation, Yanderi. Well, very quickly, I'm going to try to answer 3 questions here. I believe that the 2 first questions can connect between each other on how to mitigate distrust and the communication with the elderly in the community. An example is when I grew up listening to the elderly saying, the documents do not speak with us. Why? Because these were different languages. And the idea is that this is a document contained in documents of public policies, and they didn't take into account the way of life of the communities. So what we want and what we suggest is to change the dynamics of relating to the communities and to be able to interpret the condition of the indigenous peoples. Is not the same dynamics that I take the project, that taking into account the project of life. In regard to the recommendations that you requested, I'd say that we should provide more space for decision-making to the youth, by the youth, and that actually work with indigenous communities that work directly, because they know the reality of each community, because some youngsters, they are part of the decision-making tables. They don't go to the territories. They are not aware of the reality. it's necessary to provide spaces to those people who come directly from the communities and are providing some solutions. Also, another recommendation is to provide more access to the financing to these youth organizations. Thank you so much, Yanderi, Sebastián, Josefina, Everilda, Natalia. In fact, I would like to thank you. This has been such a wonderful panel that has shown not only the capacities and conflicts, but the richness and the diversity of the region. Thank you so much to you all. Thank you so much to the panelists and to the moderator, Matias. Thank you for this wonderful panel you just saw. We would like to invite you to stay or remain in this conference room for the next activity, that is to be geopolitics of the 21st century energy. We're going to have a break of 5 to 10 minutes so that you can step out of the conference room and then come back in 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you.